and welcome to Newshour Agenda. Madhavdas Gopalakrishnan. Amidst the display of camaraderie and friendship, it's down to business between PM Modi and US President Joe Biden as the two countries seal mega deals related to defense, trade and technology. PM Modi and US President Joe Biden are all set to announce a big deal on the purchase of Sea Guardian Predator drones expected at a cost of around $3 billion. This mega pact would enhance India's national security and surveillance capabilities, not only in the Indian Ocean but also along the line of actual control, which would further help India in countering Beijing's rising might. Not just this, an MOU has also been signed between US-based GE Aerospace and HAL to produce fighter jet engines for the Indian Air Force. Now, this is a huge boost to India's Atmanirbhar push, as according to the agreement, Aerospace's F414 engines will now be co-produced in India to power the Tejas light combat aircraft Mk2. The mega defense deals, in fact, assume greater significance as China becomes more assertive in the Indo-Pacific. Beijing's growing clout and its big investments in military and naval security have sharpened the anxieties of neighbors. Not just the partnership in defense, of course, the US also seeks to shift critical supply tech chains away from China, and this could mean a big bonanza for Bharat. The Biden administration believes that technology is being misused to spread propaganda and destabilize global security, and so is also pushing to facilitate tech development and investment into India. PM Modi had invited Micron, for instance, to boost semiconductor manufacturing in India, and the US chip maker today announced that it will set up a $2.75 billion semiconductor facility in Gujarat. As the two nations deliberate on the fine print of the soon-to-be-released joint declaration, let's also listen in to US President Joe Biden, who today said that the decisions of today will determine the future for decades. PM Modi also lauded the friendship between the two countries, which he said will be instrumental in enhancing the strength of the world.
All this matters for America, for India, and for the world. We face an inflection point, one of those moments that only come around every several generations, when so much is changing technologically, politically, socially, and environmentally, that the decisions we make today are going to determine our future for decades to come.
इस कालखंड में भारत और अमेरिका की मित्रता पूरे विश्व के सामर्थ्य को बढ़ाने में पूरक होगी। ग्लोबल गुड के लिए वैश्विक शांति, स्थिरता और समृद्धि के लिए दोनों देश साथ मिलकर काम करने के लिए प्रतिबद्ध है। हमारी मजबूत स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप डेमोक्रेसी की ताकत का स्पष्ट प्रमाण है।
Let's quickly take this across to our reporter Malvika Jain, who's joining us from the White House, where a briefing is supposed to take place in just a few minutes from now. Malvika, how much longer for the briefing? What are you hearing officially?
House, and we saw that the Secretaries of State, Defense Committee, Commerce, Energy, the Assistant to the President for NSA, U.S. Ambassador to India, Assistant to President on Clean Energy Innovation, Deputy Assistant to the President and Coordination for Indo-Pacific NSC, and the Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for South Asia. They were all present at these expanded bilaterals, and their counterparts from the Indian side were also present at the White House for the bilateral meetings. So it appears that clean energy and security and the stability in the Indo-Pacific and South Asia regions are on the agenda inside the White House for the bilaterals that are underway, which are going to conclude shortly. And then the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of India will come right here inside this room and will be talking from the podium and will be addressing the press from India and from overseas.
Well, absolutely. And Malvika, there are defense, there's much on the table, including trade, including tech. Where really do you think will be the biggest announcements this evening if you were to hedge your bets?
Defense, for sure, and technology, AI. India has been laying a lot of emphasis when it comes to defense and technology on manufacturing within the country. So they do not just want to import technology, but they want to co-produce within India, and that is something that is on the table. So it remains to be seen how far would the US go in partnering with India, but definitely some announcements are expected on defense issues.
Well, absolutely. And in fact, Malvika Jain, we'll see in a few minutes and we'll know if you're on the money or not on that. But I'll request you to stay on with us. We want to quickly go across to Senator Robert Menendez, who is in fact a very, very key person when it comes to the foreign affairs of the United States, being the chairman really of the committee there. Thank you so much, Senator Menendez, for joining us and speaking to Times Now. Now, you've described Prime Minister Modi's visit as a significant moment in the Indo-US relationship. Optics apart, what really are the tangibles that you hope will be achieved on this trip?
Well, as my resolution, bipartisan resolution that was introduced in the Senate, celebrating the longstanding and deepening partnership between the United States and the Republic of India speak to, not only is it a celebration of our people-to-people and economic ties, but obviously, in my view, I hope that the strong partnership will be more deeply built upon, because a strong U.S.-India relationship is beneficial not only for our bilateral relationship, but also for the good of global prosperity, whether it be maintaining a peaceful and secure Indo-Pacific through a series of initiatives such as the Quad, or addressing existing threats such as warming climate. I think that U.S.-India cooperation will be critical to achieving and tackling these issues. So these are some of the things I would hope that President Biden will speak to the Prime Minister about and hopefully come to some agreements with.
Also, Senator Menendez, there's been a slight divergence of opinion between the two countries on the issue of the Russia-Ukraine war. Now, you've been critical of India's stand as well, even in suggesting in a letter that you wrote to the U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin in 2021, where you said that the U.S. should be open to imposing sanctions on India if it proceeded with the purchase of the S-400 anti-missile systems. Now, India stuck to its independent course on this issue. How big is this a factor in Indo-US ties?
Well, I'm sure that'll be a conversation between the president and the prime minister. I wrote the CAATSA sanctions law. It's a global law. Only India has purchased Russian equipment, the S-400, and not been sanctioned. And so I think that, again, it's an effort to try to work together towards a common cause. India cares about territorial integrity. Well, what's happening in Ukraine is a violation of the international prospect of territorial integrity. So they should be on the side of the rest of the world that has stood up to Russia and said, you cannot by force take another country's territory. I think that's in India's interest. I think that when it comes to being a member of the Quad and India's desire to have a more global role, to have a global role, you often have to take positions, especially if you are promoting the efforts of the international order. So these are legitimate questions, that will be raised and discussed between the president and prime minister. No two countries, no bilateral relationship is without issues that need to be worked on and dealt with. And this will be one of those that I'm sure that will be worked on and dealt with between the president and the prime minister.
Senator, let's also talk about China. Now, the bilateral trade between U.S. and China stands at almost $640 billion. Currently, India-U.S. bilateral trade stands at around $159 billion. Given the concerns that USA also shares about Chinese expansionism, do you see this gap increasingly getting reduced?
Well, first of all, the challenge of China is not a question of simply of economics and trade. The challenge of China is what type of world do you want to live in? As I say to leaders from across the globe who either visit here in Washington or who I visit when I travel to their countries, it's not a choice between the United States and China. The choice is, what type of world do you want to live in? Do you want to live in a world where the state tells you whether you can have a business, what type of job you can hold, what type of profession you can pursue? Do you want to live in a world where the state tells you who you can love and marry and how many children you can have? Do you want to live in a world where ultimately might makes right, but territorial integrity is not respected? Do you want to live in a world where the state minds every aspect of your life? If that's what you want, then you want to be aligned with China. If that's not how you want to live, then you want to be aligned with the rest of the world that has a greater view of individual liberty and that creates prosperity and security. And so that's the fundamental question. It's not a question of any trade deficits. It's a question of what type of world do you want to live in? And that's the big question before us as a nation, before India, and before all countries in the world. What type of world do you want to live in?
Now, Senator, India has also got genuine concerns over instability under the Taliban in Afghanistan, and this, of course, is following the U.S. withdrawal as well. Now, there is concern that this has allowed Pakistan to get a toehold in Afghanistan, and what can the U.S. do to address Indian concerns there?
Well, look, first of all, the United States spent 20 years, $1 trillion and many American lives to help the Afghans create a society in which they could live and prosper. But at the end of the day, we did not have leadership that fled instead of stay and fight. And we did not have Afghans who were willing to fight for their own country. We cannot substitute that. We see the difference in Ukraine, where Ukraine ultimately has shown a leader who is willing to stay and fight for his country, and people who are willing to die for their country. That makes all the difference in the world, regardless of what equipment we sell to anybody. So in the case of Afghanistan, already it was preset by President Trump when he dramatically reduced the size of the military footprint, the U.S. military footprint in Afghanistan, when he gave Taliban prisoners to the Taliban, back to the Taliban, and when he specifically said there will be a date certain in which we will leave. That was before President Biden came to office. So President Biden comes to office with those realities in place. And so I say to people, if you want to know the staying power of our relationship, 20 years, $1 trillion, and hundreds of American lives, that's a pretty good commitment to a country. So as we look at the region, of course, we're still concerned about what's happening in Afghanistan. We are concerned about how the Taliban rules. We are concerned about the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan. We're also concerned that they do not ultimately allow themselves to be a nation in which extremism and attacks can be generated from. But we have over-the-horizon abilities to monitor that and to deal with it. And I think this is another reason for an important relationship with India. It's in India's interest, who lives in the neighborhood, as well as the United States.
And lastly, sir, there's also concern over the sale of F-16s to Pakistan here in India, which our foreign minister said that no one is fooling anybody by claiming that these are meant for counterterrorism. What are America's motivations in arming Pakistan despite concerns over cross-border terror from Pakistan to India?
Well, at this point, I don't envision F-16s being sold to Pakistan. I think Pakistan has bigger problems with the consequences of the flooding that took place that has caused significant devastation for the country, for the internal challenges it's having politically. And so I don't envision the F-16 at this point in time being sold to the Pakistanis. And on that note, I'm going to have to say thank you because I have to get to the Senate floor.
All right. Thank you so much. In fact, Senator Bob Menendez, for joining us and sharing with us your perspective on India-US ties. Certainly, of course, your views are those that will be taken very, very seriously, and certainly people will be following all of that you have said very closely. All eyes are now on the briefing that is to begin in just a few minutes. All right. Let's quickly take this across to our other panelists who are joining us at the moment. We have with us Charles Kupchan, Senior Fellow of CSFR, joining us live. He's also played an important role as a Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for European Affairs and the staff of the National Security Council in the Obama administration. John Chambers is chairman of US ISPF and chairman emeritus of Cisco. Also joining us is Ambassador Ashok Sajanar, former diplomat. John D. Ciorciari is the director of the International Policy Center and the Visa Diplomacy Center. We have with us Dr. Thomas A. Schwartz, author and historian of U.S. foreign relations from the Vanderbilt University. Let me start with you first, Mr. John Chambers. You're no stranger to India. You've been coming here for several decades now, and certainly no stranger to Prime Minister Modi as well. What, in your view, would be the biggest takeaway in terms of India and U.S. coming closer? The large number of CEOs that the Prime Minister has met, at least 3 rounds of meetings, several today, tomorrow, and even on his arrival in New York 2 days back. What really are, you think, the impediments and the ways forward that those breakthroughs can happen between the two countries? And as far as this bilateral meeting is concerned, any announcements in that regard? Mr. Chambers.
You raised them for your viewers. I have for a long time been the biggest optimist, the biggest bull on India, and the biggest believer in Prime Minister Modi's vision and strategy for India and a partnership with the U.S. I think the partnership with the U.S. has come so far in the last 5 years, and the building of the foundation for changing the country's views in each category. So I think it goes way beyond just defense or joint working on innovation of critical or emerging technology. I think it has the chance to change the lives of every citizen, both in India and all 29 states, and in the U.S. and all 50 states. I think we can innovate together as the 2 largest democracies in the world need to do. And I think you will see today just a starting point for many of the changes that would be made. And if you think about if we were on this discussion 5 years ago, it would have been almost unheard of to say India was going to be the fastest growing economy in the world. The most strategic partnership in the world between any 2 countries will exist between the U.S. and India, that the position to do technology together will allow both countries to increase their standard of living at a very rapid rate. People would have said that was a dream too far, and yet it is happening. And I think Prime Minister Modi's position on this has been outstanding. In terms of how the CEOs view this, you already know this. A large number of CEOs in America are part of the Indian diaspora. And it's whether it's Microsoft or IBM or Adobe or Google. Probably a third to half of our startups in technology are led by people part of that diaspora. And each job we had here in the U.S. From a visa coming in from India creates 5 additional jobs. So I think we're just scratching the surface on what this means. I think it's important to not judge every single movement on the chessboard at once. It's the ability to outline a very ambitious plan. And I think this partnership will change the future of the world in a very positive way. The CEOs believe it as well, unanimous support in terms of the partnership with India and what it can mean to all of us. You saw that with Apple's move into India. You've seen it with Boeing. Right. You've seen it with GE engines, et cetera.
Yes, well, that's very important. In fact, I'm going to get to defense right away. And Charles Gupton, this is the big announcement that many are looking at. Of course, there's cooperation in technology, in business, in trade, so on and so forth. But the big ticket announcements many look at are, from the Predator drones to the new agreements following Comcosa and Lemoa, the various agreements between our 2 armed forces and how they can work together operationally, perhaps on ground in the future. All of these are also being seen as very, very important developments that are not only, of course, going to help India and US come closer in terms of the manufacturing capabilities, but also in terms of future defense cooperation in an operational role.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, this really is a historic day. It marks a fundamental revision and upgrading of the US-India relationship. And no question the United States is trying to wean India of its reliance on Russia for military technology. It's also the case that the United States sees technology as a cutting edge of defense issues moving forward, and will be engaging with India on many different fronts when it comes to high tech and the application of high tech, both for defense and non-defense uses. I do think that given how much pomp and circumstance there is here, how high our expectations are for the relationship, it's important not to overpromise, not to have expectations that are too high, because there are differences beneath the surface on Ukraine, on China. I think India isn't going to be the core ally of the United States on China when it comes to the South China Sea, when it comes to confronting China over Taiwan. And another issue is that the United States is used to having allies like Japan, South Korea, Germany, that are in some ways junior partners. I don't think we're going to see that with India. I don't think India is going to join a U.S.-led bloc. It will in some ways pave a new pathway to a world that is going to be in some ways much more multipolar than it is bipolar. So yes, this is a key moment in the relationship, but it's going to be one that is going to be difficult to manage, and let's keep our expectations in check.
Well, absolutely. And India's always had an independent foreign policy. And I want to bring in Ambassador Ashok Sajanar on that point because, India has had a history. There have been hesitations traditionally. And many say that perhaps now's the time when perhaps India and US, we've seen how all the stops have been pulled out for this particular state visit. How important do you think it is for India to be able to, not go by the traditional definition of what an ally is, and yet come closer and closer to US in terms of ties on various multifaceted levels? And how far do you think Prime Minister Modi has played a very important role over the past 9 years in actually pushing for that? Ambassador.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that's already been happening. If you look at, you mentioned about the last 9 years. And I think whether it was the 2.5 years of the Obama administration, 4 years of the Trump administration, and the 2.5 years with President Joe Biden, I think this process has been going on. You look at 2016, India signed the LMOA, and India was made a major defense partner in 2016 during the Obama reign. Then in the Trump administration, India signed the POMCASA, India signed the BECA. India was, upgraded to what is called the Strategic Trade Authorization 1 list, which really sort of, removes India from, jumping through the hoops as far as technology transfer to India is concerned. During the Biden administration, you look at the number of meetings the two leaders have had, the close rapport, the body language that both the leaders display. They have said on more than one occasion, for instance, you recall in Tokyo last year on the sidelines of the Quad Summit, Prime Minister Modi said, I consider this to be a partnership of trust. And this after coming, you referred to it yourself, his address to the 2016 joint session of the US Congress, where he said that we have overcome the hesitations of history. And President Biden saying last year in Tokyo, that I want the relationship with India to be the most important relationship for the United States. And similar sentiments coming out of, other senior officials or in the US administration. The point I'm making is that notwithstanding the differences over Ukraine, and it is my understanding that the United States has made its peace over the Indian position. We heard even from Jake Sullivan last year, where he said that, one issue is not going to determine our relationship with India.
Right.
I think the areas of convergence are far too large and far too important. And it is in the interest of the United States to see India as a strong player, both economic as well as defense. And I think that would be its intention, so that a stronger India would be able to act as a deterrent against the actions of China, whether it is in Taiwan, whether it is in South China Sea or elsewhere. Irrespective of there might be some differences on Ukraine. But I think even that, if you would like to discuss, I'll be happy to come in on that.
Right.
I think India's position has been very close to the US position, except that we have not criticized it in so many words. But that is also to balance China, use Russia to balance against China because of our relations with that country.
Well, that's a very important point. And in fact, let me take that question across to John D. Ciocchiari. I hope I've got your name right. Apologies if I haven't. In terms of the Prime Minister's second address to the joint session of the Congress, how far do you think important issues such as Russia, such as China, which are in fact very tricky to navigate for any world leader, and India having already taken a very independent line in the past, we know India's position on these issues, balancing multiple concerns that it has domestically. How far do you think that the Prime Minister, if you were to hazard a guess, would actually touch upon such issues? John.
My guess is that Modi's engagement with the Congress will focus on the many areas of overlapping interests and priorities that his administration has with the U.S. government. I think that he will acknowledge that there are differences. As my colleagues have said, that's a normal part of a healthy diplomatic relationship. There's never going to be complete convergence on major issues facing the two countries. But I don't think that he'll want to make those the focus of his conversation, whether it's critiques of India's domestic policies or whether it's India's position on Ukraine, or for that matter, the broader array of issues on which India carves out an independent space in foreign policy. I think he'll very much want to focus on this opportunity to drive home what the areas of commonality are in the relationship and try to advance those. Modi is in a very favorable position right now. He's being courted and feted by the Biden administration, much as some of his predecessors were in the mid-2000s, at a time when the United States, on both sides of the aisle, sees obvious strategic and economic and diplomatic reasons to want to draw India closer. And that enables Modi to, request and probably receive pretty favorable treatment on issues such as defense and technology transfer, but also to have concerns between the U.S. and India communicated more through private channels than through public ones.
Right.
And so I do expect that the address to the Congress will focus on the positives, and that the areas of tension are going to be handled privately.
All right. Gentlemen, I'm going to request you all to be a little patient and stay with us as we slip into a very quick break. Dr. Samir Lalwani, Senior Expert of the Asia Center, U.S. Institute of Peace, also joins us. I'm going to request you to stay on with us as well, Samir. We're slipping into a very quick break, but we'll continue with this discussion in just a few minutes.